Hello and welcome to the Survival to Success podcast by the Health Warrior. Today, I want to talk to you about a very interesting topic, and that is how can we trade expectation for appreciation to really change our life? And so in this episode, I want us to really explore the transformative power of appreciation. In order to do that, we must let go of those expectations that hold us back. And then once we're able to do that, we can really get to a place of personal growth, self-discovery, and we feel so much more fulfilled in our life. So in other words, those expectations just gotta go. So when it comes to expectations can create a lot of unnecessary pressure and stress in our life. So have you ever noticed how we all have these mental ideas or maybe even a mental script for how things should be? Well, that's expectations. So think of it as planning scenarios in your head, predicting how everything should go. But here's the catch. Expectations can bring on stress unexpectedly. And if you can just imagine it this way, you've planned the perfect day, things don't go as you thought they would, and then feel the amount of stress that you feel as a result. So let's say if you expect to have something go really well at work, like a flawless presentation. Maybe you're expecting your relationship to be perfect, or expecting the perfect day. You've planned out a whole day and you're expecting it to unfold in a certain way. Well, when you have those expectations, it's like turning up the dial on a pressure cooker. It's really turning up the pressure in yourself. And so these expectations create pressure. And so when reality or what really happens doesn't match up with your expectations, it can really open things up to anger, stress, frustration, and disappointment. So let's say you've created the idea for a family gathering. Haven't we all done this, where we think it's going to be great? We're all going to get along. It's going to be so happy. We're all going to play games and have a joyous time. And then we have to have a reality check when the day really comes and people are there, because family dynamics are complicated. Maybe there's people that don't want to play games. Maybe there's people that get into an argument. And honestly, so this is why, if we can embrace the fact that life and things that we plan are not going to be perfect and as we expect, it can lead us to have a more genuine interlude or interaction with family without having the stress of having things not meet your expectations. And so let's say you've planned a work presentation and you're just thinking that I'm going to do this presentation. It's going to come out perfect. And then while you're there, you get unexpected questions. You get unexpected challenges, maybe even technology issues. And so if you were in a place where you accepted imperfections, appreciated that you did your best, you would have much less stress, and you actually would have probably better work come out of you instead of setting these unrealistic expectations. And this is where we end up getting disappointed, right? So if we can let go of having these rigid ideas about the way things should be, then we can trade those expectations and really begin to appreciate that journey, all those little steps, all those little things. And so what this will give you is it will give you an opportunity to have a stress-free life, because when we have expectations and we're attached to those expectations, this is what leads us to have disappointment, stress, and suffering. There's a quote that I just love, and it's the cause of all suffering is attachment. And seriously, that is so true, because when we attach to those expectations, we really, almost make it part of our identity, whether this thing goes good or not, right? And so it can be very serious in terms of how much stress it can cause for us. And so the title of this slide here, if you're watching on YouTube, is that expectations are the perfectionist trap. And that is because when you are a perfectionist, you really set almost unachievable high standards for everything that you do and everything that you plan, everything that you're working towards. And so it is a trap for a perfectionist, but it's also a trap for your everyday person who sets expectations, because when you attach, no matter what those expectations are, when you attach to them, it potentially is the cause of suffering and disappointment. But there is a very important connection between perfectionism and the expectations, because it's all about the way that you look at being perfect, because you're expecting things to be a certain way, which is your meaning of what perfection is. So this is what we do, and I've had this experience. I am a recovering perfectionist myself, so I can speak to this. So what we do is we set the bar really high for ourselves, expecting everything to be flawless. So it could be a perfect presentation. It could be the perfect relationship. And we forget that the beauty in life lies in the spontaneous and the imperfect moments that we potentially can have. But if we're so attached to those perfect expectations, then we're living a life of disappointments. And so, for example, have you planned to have a perfect day? Maybe you're going to go hiking and you planned exactly your map, when you're going to stop for lunch, how things are going to go, but then perhaps part of the trail is closed and you can't get here and this doesn't work and all these things. And so you're faced with all these hiccups. So if you were really attached to the expectations of having a perfect day, it's like chasing, a rainbow's end that keeps moving, that you can never achieve, that you can never get to. And so this is why, if you are aiming for perfection, it will always cause disappointment, because there's no such thing as perfect. So it's like, it has such an impact on our health, because if you imagine like striving for perfection is like having a boss who is yourself that never gives you a day off, it can take such a toll on our well-being and give us things like stress, anxiety, and feelings like we're never good enough. And it's a constant pressure and a constant stress. And so this is where the truth is. When we live in appreciation and we embrace imperfection and spontaneity, and we embrace that, living in a different way, it can be like getting to like the secret place of freedom from yourself, freedom from those expectations, freedom from the heaviness of perfectionism. And so let's trade perfectionistic expectations for a much more joyful journey. And your well-being and your health and your peacefulness will thank you. So the thing is here, perfectionism and expectations, you can see how they're intricate, like they're very, very closely linked. But that is no way to live. It is no way to live attached to perfect expectations that you'll never achieve. How are you going to feel good about yourself if you live that way? The third one is about procrastination and expectations. And if you can imagine it this way, this is the concept. Is and I was there. When we set our expectations too high, that can lead to procrastination. And what we do is we delay action because we are scared of not being perfect, right? So we have such an idealized version of how things should be that we are led to a place of really delaying our actions, and we'll do it later, and we kind of get halted in terms of progress. Like, for example, let's say if you have a project proposal to do for work, and we have this expectation it needs to be flawless. And so then what happens is anxiety kicks in, then you hesitate to start, and then procrastination sets in, and the deadline approaches, and all of a sudden you have all this time crunch and this rush and this stress, and all of this, it kind of compounds into some true pressure and suffering here, right? And so if you think of another example here, like let's say if you had, if you're setting a goal for a fitness journey, for example, and you say, okay, I'm going to set a goal for a healthy lifestyle, and I have this idea of a perfect fitness routine, and you have this big idealized, expectations for how it's going to go. But then what happens is you become overwhelmed by just how impossible the plan is that you created. And so then you delay starting it, and there you go. The procrastination starts to come in. So you can see how setting high expectations connected to perfectionism leads to procrastination. So it's all so connected. So this is the thing. Expectations fuel procrastination. And it's important to understand that. So it's important for us to set small, realistic goals and just appreciate ourselves when we achieve those small goals, and really embrace progress as we move on that pathway to achieving those little goals, because it's those small goals that will lead us to the big goals. So expectations totally fuel procrastination, and it gets in the way of us taking action and can stop us from achieving our goals over and over. And this creates frustration, it creates anger, it creates feelings of self-doubt. It makes us feel like we can't accomplish anything, and it gets us really frustrated and in this terrible loop of not achieving what we want to achieve and feeling really bad about ourselves. Now, part number 4 here is about the good enough dilemma. And so when we have like expectations that we can't ever meet, right? Because as a perfectionist or as somebody who likes things done right, we set these high expectations. We may or may not procrastinate and feel bad about ourselves not getting there. And then when we don't have those expectations met, either because of perfectionism, either because we've set too high of a goal, or because we're procrastinating, then we begin to feel really bad about ourselves and that we are not good enough, right? And so this has an impact on our health, has an impact on our well-being, and we constantly feel inadequate, right? Because we have these high standards and these constant unmet expectations of ourselves. So imagine setting the expectation that every project that we do should be perfect. So what happens is, despite things like working hard and, working in maybe on the hamster wheel, feeling inadequate, and honestly, if we notice everything we do wrong, we get upset with ourselves, and we're in this vicious cycle, like what I talked about with expectations, perfectionism and expectations and not feeling good enough. Honestly, what does that lead to? It leads to burnout. Totally leads to burnout. And then things like, even in relationships, let's say if we expect, that somebody should be the perfect partner, or they should be the perfect friend or perfect family member, or we expect ourselves to be. So what happens is we can feel overwhelmed when there's conflicts, and then it can really lead to our relationships being strained and really not healthy at all. And it's all because of expectations, right? That we have these expectations of people and expectations of ourselves. And so ultimately, the negative impact here is that feeling not good enough will affect our mental health, our self-esteem, where we really begin to doubt our abilities, and it impacts our overall life satisfaction, right? So what do we get when we're trapped in this? We get a cycle of self-criticism. We may get a fear of failure for good reason, because who can even be successful if you're setting ridiculous expectations and all this stuff, and then you're procrastinating because of how extreme your expectations are. And then what do? Yeah, you have fear of failure, and you begin to avoid new opportunities because you know you're going to get trapped. It's all subconscious. We feel like we're going to get trapped in the same cycle again. And so this is the challenge, right? Is understanding and breaking free from these vicious cycles are so important, not only for to have a peaceful life, to feel good about yourself, but also to have healthy connections in our life. And so this is the importance of having good communication and really appreciating the people in your life rather than having expectations for how they should be, how they should behave. And also, don't forget, this is all relevant to how you believe you should be as well, because we set those expectations for how we should be, and most of the time it's like we don't even allow ourselves to be human. So this brings me to talking about the vicious cycle of expectation, which I've talked about a little bit already, and it's like the toll that expectations can take on our emotional well-being. And this leads us to stress, anxiety, and disappointment, right? Whereas if you get rid of expectation and you simply go with the flow of life and appreciate what life has to offer, and don't have expectations, it's a completely different life, right? And also the expectations, they completely hinder our growth, because what happens is we have all these self-imposed limitations, and we have this vicious cycle of suffering. And so we stop ourselves from doing new things. Maybe it could be a new job. Maybe it could be deciding to go on a plant medicine retreat and trying ayahuasca, or we have all these things that that part of us feels like, you know what, I would love to do that, but something stops you subconsciously from doing that because you really are living in the vicious cycle of expectation. And so I want to talk a little more about the strain on relationships, because that is a really big deal when it comes to expectations, because, expectations when it comes to relationships, it's like we might even expect a friend to understand our needs without even telling them, without having clear communication. The same thing would be with a partner. So then what happens is we feel let down, we feel misunderstood. It might lead to being distanced from that person and having resentment for them. But seriously, communication is key. Like, if we want people to understand, we have to talk openly about our needs, about our feelings, and how we feel, and be realistic and understand that nobody is perfect. Everyone has their own limitations, and we really need to be flexible. We need to be adaptable and move away from having expectations, and try to be appreciative of the other person, which means, like, you may have empathy to understand that they may have their own challenges and their own perspectives that have nothing to do with you. So if you're taking things personally, because you had some kind of expectation about the way that friend should be, it's going to be destructive to that relationship and to any kind of partnership or even business relationship that you're in, right? So this is where breaking free from this vicious cycle of expectations is so critical for all of those healthy connections in our life. The last thing I want to talk about here is about the perfectionism and procrastination loop. And I think on the last slide, I really talked a lot about how perfectionism and procrastination are so interconnected. And so I think I've explained that pretty well. But again, just to say, it is a detrimental cycle. And perfectionism fuels procrastination, which then fuels more perfectionism. And the key thing is breaking free from all expectation and switching it over to being in appreciation can lead to, you can relax, you can breathe, and actually it makes you more productive and it makes you more fulfilled in your life. So having those ridiculous expectations, and you think that, I have high, and you can have high standards without being perfectionistic, but it's when you set those standards so high that they're pretty much unachievable and you get into procrastination loops, well, you're not going to be a very effective employee or a partner or a project manager or whatever it is that you're working on if you're stuck in that particular loop. So now let's talk a little bit about how to get to appreciation through mindfulness. And I know a lot of us have heard the word mindfulness, but what that word really means, it just means being here right now, being present right now. Where we are, all we have is the present moment. So the past does not exist and the future does not exist. All that exists is right now. And so if you can move from, being sad or depressed or worried about the past and being scared of the future, and bring yourself to the present moment and really work on some of those practices. If you feel that you need help with it, like, using meditation, hypnosis, like I do hypnosis or hypnotherapy. We can use silence and to bring ourselves into the present moment, to allow ourselves to really begin to be grateful and to appreciate what we have going on right now in this moment, and really begin to practice that. And it takes work. Believe me, I was a perfectionist, a procrastinator, I was all those things. And it took me work. I even had to start with 1 minute of silence. I couldn't even sit still for 1 minute in the beginning. So bringing yourself into the present, allowing yourself to be free of noise and distraction and your phone and pen and paper and books and all the other things, and just taking that time to be quiet and breathe into your heart space. And I'll tell you what, once I got to 8 minutes and 10 minutes, and I started to feel that deep sense of peace that came with really letting go and being in the present moment, it was so powerful, and I'll never forget how that felt the first time. I remember feeling like I cannot remember ever feeling like this, because I always was in survival mode. I was always in pressure. I was always in noise. I was always in expectation. I was always in being on the hamster wheel of, I got stuff to do. I got this and that. And I had no time I didn't even sit down ever. I may have sat down for a few minutes to eat if I had to. Otherwise I would eat on the run, And so I am the perfect example of, I know what happens when you make yourself take those precious minutes to be in the present moment and to just allow yourself to be disconnected from the entire world and to connect with yourself. Breathe into your heart space and learn to appreciate. So you can really begin to appreciate that feeling that you get. And until you feel it, I can't even explain how it feels. It's a profound sense of peace and freedom from all of the stuff in life. Seriously, it's amazing. Now, the second thing is to set realistic goals. So to say, okay, I'm going to work on getting this piece of this presentation done, and, not see it as this big elephant, this big perfect elephant that's completely unachievable, because it leaves you in this place of, like I've already said, the cycle of suffering and worry and pressure and all this kind of stuff, because guess what? There is no such thing as perfect. So there's no point getting caught in the trap of being in a perfectionist trap. Slow down, get into the present moment, set yourself small goals that you can achieve, and then reward yourself in those times where you are mindful and in the present moment. Reward yourself, because you're going to start to begin to feel the effect of being in the present with and appreciating yourself. And so we really can break free from the procrastination and the perfectionism loop, and we can take those small, consistent actions towards changing your life. And for me, what I did was I had a hypnotherapist, and I was able to develop a do it now mantra, so that basically I would just pick small things and do it right now, and I wouldn't leave things, right? So I wouldn't have things build up and seem to get, this insurmountable list of things to do, right? And so I advise that if you are having trouble, getting into this mindfulness, you're having trouble overcoming procrastination, certainly reach out to me or another hypnotherapist and get some help to try to overcome this, because you really can program this into your subconscious mind that you are worthy of that time. You are worthy of the peace. You are worthy of taking a break. And it doesn't mean that you're lazy or that you're not doing enough or this or that. Seriously, we need this time to be able to slow down and to sharpen the saw, to really change our mind and to really begin to appreciate. And we actually become more productive, not less productive. And the last part is to remember not to be hard on yourself. It is so important to be compassionate about yourself, to remember to love yourself and focus on that you are worthy. You are worthy of taking a break. You are worthy of rest. And I'll go so as far to say is that we all need to have quiet, introspective times where we can really be in the present moment, so that we can develop that shift in perspective and have that greater sense of self and appreciation. That is so important. And you know what? We need to do that for ourselves, to really begin to love ourselves, to really counteract the negative impact of those expectations, that heaviness that we've been setting for ourselves probably for decades. And like, we deserve to have time where we can really begin to feel for ourselves and look after ourselves, instead of being caught on the hamster wheel or being stuck where we feel like we can't try new things because we're worried about what's going to happen. There is a really big downside to that, because you're already setting expectations, right? And that is going to lead to suffering. It's going to lead to disappointment. It's going to lead to all the things I just talked about when it comes to having those expectations, which expectations, especially attachment to those expectations, leads to suffering. It's a proven fact. I've lived it. And this is why it's so important to actually practice getting to appreciation in your life, getting into the present moment, and then beginning to develop that self-compassion. It's all so important, and you deserve it. So now, I hope after all this talking, you can truly see the transformational power of appreciating your life without expectations and leaving perfectionism and procrastination in the dust, getting rid of it from your life. And I suggest that you practice this in your life and see that you can totally get incredible results and an incredible new sense of well-being just by taking that time to be silent and quiet and really having appreciation for all areas of your life, everything, whether it's your kids, your family, your work, whether you're planning to do an ayahuasca ceremony, you're planning on going on a trip, you're planning a vacation, whatever it is, begin to have appreciation instead of setting expectations that are going to create suffering and disappointment. And it's a proven fact that it happens over and over and over. And that's why attaching to expectations leads to suffering in our lives. So I hope now that this presentation has left you empowered and feeling inspired to have to take a completely new path through your life, to have a new level of appreciation, and without all of those draining and life-limiting expectations. I also want to take a moment to thank you for making it this far in this podcast. To me, this shows that you have a real commitment to making positive change in your life. And I want to thank you for taking the time to listening to this very deep, and I hope you can hear me speaking from the heart, because this is a perfect example of what I have been able to overcome, and I know just how transformational it is. And so here we are. It's time to embrace appreciation, get rid of expectations. It's an ongoing process, because yes, it's an old pattern and sometimes we catch ourselves doing it again. But once we practice appreciation, we can get to the place where we're on a path of starting to feel those little bits of joy, those little bits of fulfillment, the peace and the freedom from the old pressures, the old expectations that we put on ourselves and that we put on others. Our relationships will change. So many things in your life will change if you really focus on getting rid of expectations and exchange that for appreciation. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you on the next episode.